This is Randy Sullivan, the host of Bourbon Real Talk. I grew up in a small town and went to a small church where everyone looked and thought like me. Over the years, I've gotten to know and love people from all different walks of life. This has made my world bigger and richer. The secret ingredient in forming those relationships was getting to know people's real stories. That helped me to identify with them, have compassion on them, and eventually develop a real connection with them. We live in a disconnected world today, and I want to do everything in my power to build connections between individuals who may not have attempted friendship otherwise. I've observed this happening in the bourbon community on its own because whiskey naturally brings people together. Bourbon Real Talk hopes to combine the world's new passion for bourbon into an opportunity to bring people together. We will share some whiskey knowledge, some good drams, and some real talk. So sit back, pour a drink, and open your hearts and minds. You might just find yourself feeling more connected to the people in the world around you, all fueled by bourbon. Welcome, everybody, to a very special edition of Bourbon Real Talk. We are at Iron Root Republic Distillery with a very distinguished guest. Go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
I'm Robert Likarish. I'm one of the owners and distillers here at Iron Root. The younger of the two brothers.
So we had a whole debate. We did a barrel pick here. We had a whole debate before we came over on how to pronounce your last name, and we couldn't settle the debate. And then I went to another barrel pick at Lone Elm, and Brandon over there kept saying the Licorice Brothers, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. None of us guessed that. So
Really?
yeah, I don't know. I think we were just trying too hard.
I think so.
So what we're gonna do today is we might actually drink two different whiskeys. We've got Iron Root Hubris, which is a straight corn whiskey. We also have the Iron Root Bourbon. So why don't you tell us a little bit about these two whiskeys while I pour myself a glass?
All right, sure. We'll start out with Hubris. That's probably the one we're most well known for. That's our purple corn whiskey. So basically, it's a mash bill of 95% yellow corn, 5% purple corn, aged exclusively in used European oak barrels. This is our guy that has won all the really big awards for us, from everywhere from Whiskey Magazine, being named the best corn whiskey in the world 2 times now, and also double gold and best in class at San Francisco and all those things.
Can I complain for just a second?
Yeah.
I've been trying to pour up samples out of the Iron Root bottles, and there's something about that lip that it just wants to hold on.
Yeah, you got to commit. You got to
go hard.
Yeah.
You got to pour it hard. So for those of you that are listening and not watching, I tried to gently pour the whiskey out. Iron Root whiskey wants to be drank, so pour with a little bit of passion. You can also take one of those little deals that goes inside of wine bottles, and that's how I've been filling my sample bottles at home. So this is the Hubris corn whiskey, voted the #1 corn whiskey in the world twice. So let's smell it up.
Jump in there.
So this is a very large nose.
Yeah.
It's huge. And so we're going to talk a lot today about the differences between, Kentucky whiskeys and Texas whiskeys. And one of the things that I am observing is that Texas whiskey has a much bolder flavor, mostly from the grain. But our aging conditions obviously change the barrel impact as well. So when I smell this, I get like, and I may be the only person who's ever told you, I get like a buttered toast.
Yeah.
So there's a toastiness component, but also lots of like sweet flavor, some, vanilla, maybe some anise, licorice. Things like that. What else do you pick up?
I get a little bit of clove generally.
Clove. That's the word I was wanting to say cassis, and I was like, no, that's not it. Clove. Tons of clove.
Yeah, you get a lot of that baking spice that kind of rolls around on the nose on this guy.
And so on the palate, you're going to get all those things, but you're going to taste a lot of corn, right?
Oh yeah.
Bold corn flavors for sure. And that's something that is kind of characteristic of the Texas whiskeys that I've had. And so, can you tell me the differences between the corn that you guys use and the corn that's traditionally used, say, in Kentucky whiskeys?
Yeah, sure. So traditionally in Kentucky, they're going to use a number 2 yellow dent corn. That's going to be the one that's most widely grown here in the U.S. It's high yielding. It tends to be a very sweet corn overall. Um, and that's it. Again, one of the reasons they use it. It's very hearty and it's sweet, so it's got a lot of sugar. So if you're from everything from producing ethanol to feeding it to cows, it really is an attractive grain on as far as yields and as far as the amount of sugars that it produces. For us, when we got into this, one thing that we wanted to do was try to explore some different avenues and really been looked at really in depth before. And so that's why we jumped wholeheartedly into different varieties of grains. So not only corn, but what else is there in the world of corn? And there are thousands of varieties of corn. So from us, we've got three or actually four different core corns that we use, but then we also experiment with a bunch of other ones. So
Mm-hmm.
as when we were talking about with hubris here, it's actually got a purple corn in it that originally was from South America. And now it's grown up a little bit farther north from here, but it's a really high in antioxidants. So my brother likes to joke it's a very healthy corn. Unfortunately, by the time we make whiskey, I don't think it's healthy anymore. They have, because they tend to be a little bit higher in protein. They create very different flavors than traditional yellow corn will when it comes to distillate.
Gotcha. And so this show's basic format, in just to give you a little bit of backstory, I've discovered that whiskey has a habit of bringing people together from all different walks of life. And honestly, man, I grew up prejudiced. I didn't get exposed to a lot of different types of people, and I had preconceptions. But as I got older and I met people and I really got to learn their real story, all of that kind of went away. And so this is a non-traditional recording for us because this is almost like a Bourbon Pursuit type version, right? Because we're with the distiller, we're in the distillery. And I haven't wanted to try to do what the Bourbon Pursuit guys do because they do it so well and they have access to so many more famous, whiskey people up there in Kentucky. So, but there is a prejudice that we're going to try to get rid of today. It's not as important as the stigma associated with depression, suicide, racial prejudices, biases against different sexual orientations. But there still is a prejudice out there against Texas whiskey, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
and I feel like that needs to change because people. There was a time where people defined good whiskey by how much it tasted like Scotch, right? That's gone by the wayside. And now people understand, oh, Kentucky bourbon is not supposed to taste like Scotch. It has a flavor of its own. And people have trained their palates to now be more accepting of that flavor that comes out of Kentucky. But now that bias has switched over to against whiskeys that don't taste like Kentucky bourbon. Okay. And so if for those of you who are watching at home, I'm going to carry some of this corn up so that you can see an up close view. Y'all know what yellow corn looks like because the corn that they make whiskey out of in Kentucky doesn't look significantly different from what you get in the store. But I want you guys to look at this corn. Okay. So I'm going to put this down and carry this up.
So the two corns he's bringing up there, he's got one. The first one is our glass gem flint corn. So it's a very small kernel. You can see they're very small, but they actually have multicolored within the same kernel, which is really cool. And then the one he's showing right now is actually bloody butcher corn, which is one of the most widely of the heirloom varietals that's growing here in the U.S. But they all have very different flavors, and even when you grow them in different areas, you actually will get different genetic characteristics that start developing in different areas. So it's really fun to see how they change.
So I think the thing that was so shocking for me whenever I saw, these two corns in person is how on earth, having seen these corns, could you think that they're going to taste like Kentucky bourbon? It just couldn't. It's not possible. They're so different, right? And so they do produce a much bolder flavor, for sure. But you guys still use yellow corn varietals. In fact, you use the. From what I understand, these corns you only use 5 to 10% of. Is that correct?
Right. And generally, every once in a while, we'll use a little bit more. Again, we've just ran a few that are a little bit higher on the Bloody Butcher. But yeah, the yellow corns are gonna. So we use also a local non-GMO yellow corn. The reason why we use the non-GMO corn, it's not because we have any opinions on the I guess the greatness of GMO versus non-GMO. But the GMO corns have been bred to be very sweet, and that's the only focus for them was yield and sweetness when they were breeding these corns. And so as they did that, it bred out all the other flavors. It bred out a lot of other traits in corn that these older varietals are ones that haven't been. It's been focused more on other parts of the flavor other than the sweetness. So even when we're looking for new corns, because we're always experimenting with new corns, when we look at the descriptions of the corn, the last thing we want to see is it has a really good corn flavor. Well, that's great. They're all going to have good corn flavor, but I want to know what other flavors they have. What are the other things I can get out of this? And I think we use these specialty corns as the flavoring grains in a lot of our mash bills.
Gotcha. And so, just so that the people understand, how much do you pay per pound for your yellow corn?
Yellow corn, about 35 cents a pound.
How much do you pay per pound for these heirloom corns?
So the heirloom corns, like the Bloody Butcher, is going to be up closer to about $1 a pound. The Glass Gem Flint or the Green Oaxacan, some of those can be as high as $16 a pound.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
$16 a pound versus 35 cents a pound. Yeah. And so when you guys taste Texas whiskey and you go, ooh, this tastes different, it costs roughly 60 times as much to produce that flavor that you guys are saying you don't like. And it's not that you don't like it, it's just that you haven't trained your palate yet to understand that it's supposed to taste different, right? And so what I hope that we can get out of this is that we need to start judging all whiskeys, but especially Texas whiskeys, based on their flavor.
Yeah.
And not based on some comparison to, what you think the greatest whiskey in the world is, right? Because when you taste things like this blind, one, you're not going to know what you're tasting. You're going to think you're tasting some rye whiskey or something because there is so much clove and so much baking spice. These are 100% corn whiskeys that taste like they're heavily rye mash bill, right?
Yeah.
And so when we came here, we picked 2 barrels. And when you guys do barrel picks, you don't let us know anything about what we're tasting until we've picked.
Exactly. I think for us, it's more fun to see what your opinions are of things. We won't even tell you whether it's a corn whiskey or a bourbon until after you've gone through and tasted. And there are some that we have some low rye and high rye mash bills back in the back that we do as well. They're a little more traditional mash bill. But it's funny that a lot of times we'll get people they'll taste a low rye versus one of the heirloom corns, and they'll think that one's the low rye or has a lot more of those flavor notes to it. Which is, so for us, it's a lot of fun to really see people guess what they're trying to taste, what they're tasting, or at least even eliminate that whole preconception of what it's supposed to taste like.
So I got asked by a liquor store to put together a tasting panel to buy a barrel. And the first thing that I told him was, I don't drink a lot of Texas whiskeys, so I'll do my best to find a good barrel, but it's
no promises.
No promises, basically, right? And then I start calling the people that I thought would be good to be on the tasting panel, and nearly one by one, they were just like, yeah, I don't know about a Texas whiskey, blah, blah, blah. You should see the group chat that we've had after we left. People are like, "Oh my, this blew my mind. I can't believe," Um, and I mean, really changed the hearts and minds of some die-hard whiskey people. And we ended up, if you would have asked us on our way here, hey, what do you think you're going to pick? Everybody would have thought that we were going to pick something that was a more traditional mash bill. And what did we end up picking?
You ended up picking one is a magic manna, 100% corn with yellow corn and magic manna, and then the other one was a purple corn and yellow corn in European oak.
Both 100%
Both
corn.
100% corn whiskeys.
And we just could not believe it. So anyway, I hope that if you're a listener of the show, that you will start to open up your mind a little bit and go into tasting Texas whiskeys more to look for a new experience and not compare to old ones. And I think what you're going to find is that there's several Texas distilleries that are just really producing some amazing tasting whiskey. So you guys are recently, I think y'all are founding members of the Texas Bourbon Trail, correct?
Correct. Yeah, the Texas Whiskey Association and the Texas Whiskey Trail just officially, I guess, went into, I guess, May 1st was the first day that it officially occurred, but where they sent out all the memberships and everything else like that for the trail. But yeah, no, it's a really exciting time. It's one of those things that distilling whiskey in Texas is only 10 years old, and I think that a lot of the early years was figuring out what the heck is going on in Texas, because you could try to make something and copy exactly what they're doing in Kentucky, and it doesn't turn out the same because there's so many different things here than what they see up in Kentucky or definitely than Scotland.
Right. So one of the things that contributes to those differences. Oh, and before we move on past that, the Texas Bourbon Trail. How, if somebody were interested in getting involved with that, what do they do?
You go to texaswhiskeytrail.com or just Google Texas Whiskey Trail, and it'll come up. It'll show you the map of all the distilleries. There's, I believe, 15 distilleries on the trail right now, and then it has membership opportunities. It tells you kind of what's involved with that. So you get glass shirt, you get free tours at all the distilleries, and then each of the distilleries also will be putting out their own kind of special things for trail members. Like for us, later this fall, we'll be picking a special single barrel that'll be just available to trail members and that sort of stuff.
Gotcha. So, and so when they come here, they get to do things or experience things if they're a Texas Whiskey Trail member that they otherwise wouldn't.
Right. So we'll have their regular tour that they can go on. And then afterwards, they'll get to do a few extra fun things.
Well, I can tell you, having come to this distillery and done a few extra fun things, it's an experience that you want to have as soon as possible. Tons of fun. So one of the things that contributes to those significant differences is our temperature here is a lot hotter. So one of the things that I learned here was angel share percentages. So what are the angel share percentages for, say, Scotland, Kentucky, and where you're at here in Texas?
So Scotland is generally between 1% and 2% every year. Kentucky is going to vary a little bit, about 5 to 7 generally. Sometimes on the upper floors when they have the 7-story buildings, it's going to be a little bit higher.
I think Buffalo Trace tells people 3 to 5 per year. But I think they're all brick facade, except for Warehouse H. So maybe that's why they're a little lower.
They're a little bit lower. It's a little bit more insulated of the warehouse.
And how about you?
For us, we generally see between 9 to, I'd say, generally between 9 to 12%. Some really hot years, we can get up to about 15%. I know you talk to the guys a little bit farther south, and they're going to be up in that higher range generally as well. For us, again, we're going to be a little bit lower than the guys a little bit farther south, and we also have a really highly insulated warehouse here. So generally 9%. The lowest we've seen in a single year is about 7%.
Gotcha. So with that type of angel share, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to be consistently releasing 12-year whiskeys, right?
Yeah, I don't think you'd want to drink 12-year-old that's gone through that sort of evaporation rate.
Yeah. So, whiskey clubs get excited about short barrels, right?
Exactly.
And so I tasted some short barrels recently. Not so good. We bought 3 barrels from Lone Elm, and one of the one that everyone liked the most, the barrel was like pristine. It didn't leak at all. But there's one that like it looked like the hogshead was like just about to collapse, and everyone's like, "That's going to be the good one," and no one picked it
Yep.
blind. So that's definitely a thing. This is Randy Sullivan with RSHST Capital LLC and the host of Bourbon Real Talk. Producing a podcast is time consuming and expensive, and Bourbon Real Talk wants to maintain its integrity by not promoting products or services that it doesn't believe in. For this reason, I have opted to have my funding company sponsor this program. RSHST Capital is the first of its kind funding company that provides pay at close funding to home sellers out of their equity. If you have a home to sell, need money for renovations or repairs to maximize your profit, money to stop pending foreclosure or to keep your mortgage current, or cash for really anything, then look into RSHST Capital. This program is simple. We verify that you have equity, approve you for a funding amount. You have access to that cash at practically a moment's notice for only a nominal fee. This program is raising sellers cash after closing by tens of thousands of dollars, stopping foreclosures and changing people's financial future. You pick your real estate agent, your contractor, and have access to actual cash or contracting expenses with zero upfront cost. This is a nationwide program. So if you have any curiosity about how it works, please look us up at rshstcapital.com, Facebook, or just give us a call at 214-385-9101. So that's definitely a thing. So how long have you guys been in production here? Actually, before we move on to that, I think we should try this other, or
Yeah.
I need to try the other whiskey.
Me too.
You you gonna chug. Okay. For those of you who can't see, he just chugged like
An ounce of whiskey.
An ounce of whiskey. Woo. Okay. So this is the Iron Root Harbinger Bourbon whiskey.
Mhm.
So what's the mash bill difference on these two?
So the Hubris is going to be our purple corn mash bill. That 5% purple corn, 95% yellow corn, and European oak. Harbinger is going to be a blend of all 4 of our core mash bills. So here we do, it's kind of little Four Roses ish, a little bit like Canadian, where we have separate mash bills that we blend together. So we have the purple corn one, then we have a bloody butcher corn. That's going to be that 5 to 10% bloody butcher corn, 90% yellow corn. We've got the Floriani flint corn, and then also we have a low rye mash bill. And so the Harbinger blends of whiskey that we do are gonna be more bloody butcher, more purple corn focused, and where Promethean, the other bourbon we do, is gonna have a little bit more of that rye, a little bit more of that flint corn in it. Each one of them has all 4, but they're blended to profile.
Gotcha. So, and the barrel differences between the Hubris is they're just used barrels.
So that's going to be a used European oak,
right?
Whereas Harbinger, about 30% will be brand new European oak, and 76. It varies a little bit depending on the blend because we're always blending to flavor. It'll be between 30 to 40% European oak, and the rest is going to be American oak.
Gotcha.
Every once in a while we toss a French oak in there, but not too often.
Right. And so for those of you who do not know, bourbon does not have to be aged in American oak. That is a misconception, widely held. I have heard one of the patriarchs of bourbon state that he thought that if you use French oak, that you could no longer call it bourbon. It simply states that it has to be stored in a new oak container, not even a barrel.
Right.
And it does not stipulate where the oak was harvested from.
So. I don't think they were thinking about that whenever it was done originally, but
sure. All right, so let's smell this bad boy up. I'm getting something. Hold on. My brain is trying to wrap. Caramel popcorn. I mean, right off the rip. I'm definitely getting caramel popcorn. Let's taste it. And it tastes like caramel popcorn, but with like a lot of extra spice in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still getting a lot of the clove, nutmeg, baking spices, like I did on the Hubris. And I know Hubris is like the world's best corn whiskey, but I think I like the bourbon a little more.
Yeah, and this is actually the new batch that's coming out here in a couple weeks. Every time we blend them, again, they just keep getting better. But that's always our goal of how we've structured everything we do. Is if we do a tasting panel, if a blend we put together doesn't taste better than the last batch, it doesn't get released.
Nice.
And so, at least in our opinion, it tastes better.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, every distillery has their process. So let's talk about cost, because that's one of the prejudices against Texas whiskey. Is that generally a bottle costs more than some very well-known brands that are made in Kentucky. So how much do you typically retail this bottle for?
Typically, he's going to be on shelf anywhere between 55 and 59 for the cask strength.
Man,
unless you're outside of Texas, in which case it's actually Total Wine outside of Texas sells it for $49 a bottle.
Gotcha. Is that because of some Texas tax or something?
Yeah, just the way that it's distributed in Texas, it just ends up a little bit more.
Gotcha. So with all of this per bottle money that you're getting, how do you like that new Bentley?
No, I wish. That'd be nice.
That's a little joke for you guys out there. He drives a reasonably old pickup truck, from what I can tell. Is that your truck?
Yeah, I do drive that.
Yeah. No, Texas distilleries are not getting wealthy off of their slightly higher bottle price. Explain to the good people why the bottle cost is a little bit higher than, say, Elijah Craig small batch or something like that.
Well, so for us, our pricing is always based on proof. So for us, if it's over 110 proof, then it's going to be anywhere between generally $55 to $59. If it's between 100 and 110, then we're going to try to hit from $44 to $49 on shelf, because every store is a little bit different. And then for anything 100 proof and under, we're always trying to hit $34 to $39. So it's going to be a little bit more expensive than what you see in Kentucky, but part of that's economy of scale. We're a much smaller distillery. Our overhead doesn't get spread out nearly as well. And then we're also using a little bit more expensive ingredients than what they're going to be using up in Kentucky. Between barrels, where American oak generally is about $200 a barrel, that European oak we're using is going to be about $600, $650. The French oak that we use can be anywhere between $750 and $1,500 a barrel.
Wow.
So there's a little bit more expensive inputs that we're using. Obviously, when you have the $16 a pound grain that we're using for part of the mash bill on some of them, it does up the costs a little bit to us.
Right. And one big factor is economies of scale. Mm-hmm. I mean, you guys, how big is because all of the bourbons are made in the alembic still, right? Or the
big pot still back here.
Whereas, those whiskeys are made in continuous column stills, and they're enormous.
Yeah.
They're like 3 stories tall, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always like to joke that they spill more whiskey in a year than we make.
Right.
But we're making between 250 and 300 barrels a year.
Gotcha.
Right now.
Yeah, and so their aging facility has what, 550-ish?
Yeah, I think we're closer to about 600 barrels.
600 barrels. They produce more than that per day.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so there is the factor of economies of scale. But despite the higher bottle prices, has it been smooth sailing for you guys from day one as a Texas distillery? Or you guys started off profitable and just been running to the finish line ever since?
That'd be super nice. No. No, again, the joke in the wine industry and the distilling world is that the way to make a small fortune is to start out with a really large fortune. it's a super cost heavy business. I mean, obviously you're laying down barrels for years. I mean, when you tell a bank, hey, my business plan is to make something and then not sell it for 2 to 6 years, they're not super big fans of that. And that's because you're going to go several years without making any money. I mean, in fact, a lot of craft distilleries and almost all of them I talk to have never turned a profit. They're always shoestringing everything together. And for us, I think this year will be the first year, hopefully, that we actually will turn our very first profit. So I will be able to pay myself maybe this year. So hopefully, we'll see. And again, it's definitely, this is a type of business that you have to go into it with kind of a long-term vision when you get into it, because it is going to be a long time before you can make money, and then you're going to get hit giant bumps in the road as you start and as you go. I mean, with anytime you're starting a business, you're gonna, it's gonna cost an extra 30 or 40% more than what you thought from the very beginning. Doesn't help when you have situations like we did where one of your contractors crushes a couple tanks and delays your starting for about a year, so you're still hanging out trying to get everything going. So, when you start out like that, it's all up from there, and
Wow.
and by up I mean it can go up and down quite a bit.
So what's been the biggest hurdle that you guys had to deal with since you opened?
I mean, for us, one of the things, like, we got into it, to start a distillery, you have to be either a little bit naive or super naive when you're getting into this business, about the reality, because we knew a lot about making spirits, and again, that was where we had concentrated all of our study and what we were focused on. So we knew how to make good spirits. The problem came is, then what's the route to market? How do you do all the sales on the other side? And that's been the giant learning experience for us. Is I've made a good product that people really like, but now how do I get that to a liquor store, or to get that to a restaurant? Because in Texas we have a 4-tier system. So for me to get a bottle to a liquor store, or to a bar, I have to sell it to a distributor. Distributor has to sell to a liquor store within the same county, as that bar that also has a Class B license to distribute, and then they have to send that to a bar. And so convincing everybody along the way, it's one thing for me to go into a bar and sell them on a product, but now they have to go to a liquor store and order it, and that liquor store can decide, maybe today, maybe tomorrow I'll get it, or would I rather sell them something else that I make higher margins on, or and then once you get the liquor store on board, then your distributor has to be able to get a product there. And then, especially with like special edition stuff or single barrel stuff, getting the right product to the right place sometimes can be a little bit of a difficulty. Uh, and again, there's tons of moving parts. And I think that's the one thing that we didn't really foresee, was how difficult managing all those separate parts are. Because I'm spending most of my time here with my brother working on the still and putting blends together, and now I need to be out in the market and trying to make sure all the cogs are turning. But I think we're finally getting, that's been the giant learning curve for us, and I think we're finally getting a lot of that, to understanding that a lot better than we did originally.
Yeah. So that's something that I don't think that we think about,
Mm.
right? Is just consumers of your products, is, the business aspect of it. A lot of Texas distilleries, they start off and their product is shit in the beginning, right? Like they make a bad product. You guys were able to avoid that through education, because I know you worked at some other distilleries where you were able to kind of hone your skills, but you guys also hired a very famous consultant.
Oh yeah. Nancy Fraley, who she's actually going to be here a little bit later this week, so I'm excited because it's always fun getting to hang out with Nancy. You never know what's going to happen when she's around, but and even with all of that, it's not that we didn't have things that we had to correct and fix early on. I mean, with anytime you're starting something, you have to tweak things and change things, and like if you don't go into this knowing that you're going to have to continually working on improving and getting better, I don't think you should. This is a business for you, because I think there has to be that growth in what you do.
Yeah.
And so for us, people that ask me, so is your product better today than it was, 4 years ago? My answer is going to be emphatically, heck yes.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten better. We've gotten better. The whiskey's gotten older, and I think all those things together helps out.
Yeah.
My brother will say he's He's always been really good, but
Well, that's what brothers do.
yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know who Nancy the Nose Fraley is, there's a really informative podcast on Bourbon Pursuit, somewhere in the like around 140, 138, 139, somewhere in there. The audio on it's terrible, but she kind of goes through her history. She graduated from Harvard. She has a law degree, and she has one of the most famous noses and palates in the industry. Honed her skills in I think the Armagnac or Cognac region or something like
She
that.
was trained by Hubert Germain Robon, who is a master cognac distiller who in the 80s moved to California because he got tired of the restrictions that they have in France, which
Yeah.
is you can distill these grapes and it's
Right.
the way you have to do it. And so he brought a lot of those traditional French techniques to California and started distilling Californian grapes and really made a huge name for himself. And he's since now sold off his original distillery and is consulting and doing all sorts of fun stuff now. But he was one of the really big influences on not Nancy, but on the I guess the craft distilling in the United States very early on because there weren't a lot early on. There weren't a lot of great craft products out there, and he
Sure.
was one of the ones that really stood out amongst the crowd that was when they were getting started.
Sure. And Nancy, who has been you guys' consultant
From day one.
from
Yeah.
day one, also was very instrumental in creating Joseph Magnus brand. And she is the one that created the cigar blend that everybody likes because she's also a cigar smoker.
Exactly.
And I would venture to say that these iron root products would also pair very well with the cigar.
They do. They do.
So that's all very, very exciting. Now, you did mention one thing to me that we didn't cover when we were talking about barrels. You guys are getting your barrels from International Stave mostly?
Independent Stave.
Independent Stave, I mean. And there's a technique that you guys have done to some of your barrels that cause it to have a wave in the inside or something?
Yeah, so we've got a couple different styles of barrels in the back, and part of that's been really trying to navigate the Texas weather and the oak influence here in Texas that you can get pretty heavily if you're not careful. And so for us, again, initially, everyone up in Kentucky is using a traditional char 3 or char 4. For us, we use very low char. We're looking at char 1, maybe char 2 on most of what we do. Behind that, we still want to get that caramelization of the wood, so we like to do heavy toasting to the wood. Now, Independent Stave has developed a new style of barrel they call wave stave. So they actually will groove the barrel, so when they char it, they do that char 1, actually will toast into the deep grooves and do a little light char over the top. So for us, we're not getting that heavy char, so we're not filtering out a ton of what's in the whiskey because for us, with this really active weather that we have in Texas, the whiskey is going in and out of that char layer really constantly. And if you have too thick of a layer of char, you actually end up being a more reductive than it does having a positive influence in the whiskey.
Do you think that it's fair to say that traditional Kentucky whiskeys are more flavored by the maturation process and the time they spend in the barrel, and that your products are more flavored by the grains that you use?
I'd say, yeah, especially at this stage, I'd say that's definitely, I would give a lot to that there's a lot that's going to be coming from the barrel in Kentucky whiskey, especially the older Kentucky whiskey. When you start getting beyond that 3 to 4 year mark, you start really seeing a lot more of their wood influence in what they're doing. That's why sometimes people, they can taste a wheated bourbon versus a rye bourbon and get them mixed up because you can get some barrel spice, barrel tannins that can really, you think could be that rye herbalness coming through, and it's really the barrel. With us, again, a lot of our whiskeys right now, because we're only 5 years older, all the blends tend to be between 2.5 to 4 years old on the whiskey that's going in there. And so the grain's going to be far more exert itself a little bit more at this stage and where they're at in their maturation process.
This is Randy Sullivan with the Randall Sullivan Home Selling Team and the host of Bourbon Real Talk. Producing a podcast is time-consuming and expensive, and Bourbon Real Talk wants to maintain its integrity by not promoting products and services that it doesn't believe in. For this reason, I've opted to have my real estate team sponsor this program. The Randall Sullivan Home Selling Team has operated since 2008. We've sold almost 500 homes. We have proprietary programs that make a massive difference to the outcome of our clients, and we service the entire North Texas area. If you live in North Texas and you need to buy or sell a home, please give us a chance to explain how our services could benefit you. We understand that not all of our listeners live in North Texas. We also know that not all real estate agents are created equal. If you need a real estate agent outside of North Texas, the Randall Sullivan Home Selling Team has access to tools to help you find a highly qualified agent in your area. The service is free for you, and we stick around through the end of the process to help you with your transaction, even when we're not your agent. If you have a real estate transaction in your future, please reach out to us at randallsullivanteam.com, Facebook, Instagram, or just give us a call at 214-385-9101.
Stage and where they're at in their maturation process.
Gotcha. And so that's another thing to consider when you're trying to, develop an idea of what to expect out of Texas whiskey, is that because of our climate and the extreme expense in sourcing local grains for these products, you're going to want to taste more of that grain. You're not going to want to spend $16 for corn and then filter all of that flavor out with the level 4 char that you aged for 10 years, which probably wouldn't work in Texas anyway. And then you could have produced the same thing by throwing some vodka in the barrel, right? You want to taste those grains, and that is what is unique about Texas. That's what makes Texas whiskey special, and it's why it's a category of its own.
I agree with you. I mean, it's a completely different region, and the reality is, even within Texas, you will start seeing different areas develop because, again, warmer temperatures, you're going to get a lot more barrel tannin a lot faster. And I think that's the one thing that's been the learning process for Texas distillers is how do you manage that barrel tannin? Because you can have a very grain forward whiskey, but then it gets hit with all this heavy tannin that doesn't have time to oxidize out and kind of, I guess, smooth the edges around. And so you end up with something that's really woody, but also really grain forward. And it can put a lot of people off, especially early on. And I think what Texas distillers over the last 4 or 5 years have really been trying, how do you merge those two things together? How do you soften your tannins, but also integrate the grain properly? And that's again what our goal is every day. And I know it's why we've started using larger barrels. We use about 80% of the barrels we're bringing to the distillery right now are going to be 63-gallon barrels versus 53-gallon barrels that they use in Kentucky. And I know there's at least one other, the Balcones has started using a lot of 63-gallon barrels as well. And I think you're going to start seeing that trend a lot more in Texas and some of the southern distilleries, or as deep southern distilleries, is how do you handle those barrels and allow you to age up your product to, again, because I don't think 2-year-old is the purest or best expression of Texas whiskey. It's why we've got stuff in the warehouse now that's 4 years old, and we will continue to hit older and older whiskeys, because I think there's a way that you can balance those two things out. It's just figuring out the best combination of everything.
And that just has not been figured out yet in Texas.
Yeah, it's a process I think that's going to take a generation. Kentucky's got 200 years on us. The Scots probably quite a bit longer on that. Well, I know definitely a lot longer on figuring out what is the best for our area. One of the things that we looked at early on is you go down to Mexico and look at tequilas, and the añejo tequilas tend to be 2 to 3 years old. Extra añejo tends to be around that 5 years old. And so it's one of those things that they've started to find a way to help kind of merge that tannin level with the product in even a warmer climate than we have here.
Right.
And I think that balancing that, and that's where we come in with a lot of our French techniques of managing the proofing cask, and again going with the barrel size, and also using a lot of used casks outside of the bourbon. I think it's going to be very important to the future of Texas whiskey, are these different ways to approach whiskey than what they do in Kentucky.
So you're very involved with the distillery community in Texas. Has there been any serious discussions about creating a designation for Texas whiskey like they have, say, in Tennessee?
There's definitely been discussions on it. The problem with Texas is that there's a lot of independent thinkers in Texas, and a lot of people are doing things very differently than each other. And so coming up with a consensus of what Texas whiskey is or supposed to be would be something that'd be very difficult.
Mm.
I think maybe in 40 years, there'll be a much easier discussion once a lot of the trials and tribulations have gone through from the early years.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is we're still in the infancy stage of what's going on here, and well, maybe toddler stage rather
Right. Yeah.
than infancy. And we're learning to walk. We're starting to get some personality, and you're starting to see real humans behind everything behind it.
Right.
And so I think that maybe I don't think that's the conversation to have right now. Right now, at least the way the Texas Whiskey Association has approached the concept of what is Texas whiskey, for us, it's something that's uh, distilled and matured here in Texas. Because I think both those things can be very important. Using stills here in Texas and also using the Texas maturation process. I think those two things combined are really what makes a whiskey a Texas whiskey versus not a Texas whiskey.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I've heard a little bit about Empire Rye, and but I think that they're dealing with a much smaller. The area that the Empire Rye producers are from are not nearly as diverse as it in one of the Texas whiskey trails locations in Corpus Christi or something like that. It's like way far south.
There's not one in Corpus, but you have all the way down in Houston to up here right now. So you're talking, we're 4.5 hours away from them.
So they're I mean they're dealing with different issues there than you're dealing with here. So maybe it would be difficult to have that designation. But for me, as a whiskey nerd, that would be something I think would help separate it in people's minds. Because right now, if it just says, bourbon, they're comparing it to Kentucky. And that's something that I had thought of. So what's your ideal customer? Do you have one? Do you find converts easier from like casual whiskey drinkers that like, I'll drink Crown or Jameson or whatever, or are whiskey nerds a good like source for you, or are they the hardest to convert?
It depends, really. It's where is that whiskey nerd coming from, and where are they in their journey? You've got, for us, I tend to find that our easiest converts are either on the whiskey nerd side of things. It's the whiskey nerds that are either relatively young in their journey, so they're open to tasting new things, and there's no preconceived notions of what anything's supposed to taste like. They're still exploring all the different flavors that whiskey has to offer. Or the people that are they've gone full circle, and they've gone to the top. They've been in it a long time, and now they're looking. They've tasted the best of what Kentucky or Scotland have had to offer, and they're looking for something new, a little bit different, and they're willing to accept and try out new flavors. I mean, they can tend to be a little bit more open-minded.
Right.
I think it's when you run into some people and they're like, bourbon has to come from Bourbon County, Kentucky, which for me is always a really funny anecdote to tell them. Like, I don't. You should go check to see how many distilleries are in Bourbon County.
Yeah. Until recently, it was none.
Zero. Yeah. Now there's one, and they're like 4 years old.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And so I think it's the people that tend to be in the middle of their journey tend not to be as open, because they're wanting to find the top of what Kentucky has to offer at the moment. But it's either people that are younger or the more open-minded of what bourbon can be, tend to be the ones that are willing to try and bring that open-minded enough to come in and know that it's not going to be Kentucky whiskey, and know it shouldn't taste like that.
Sure. And so just to use a little emotional manipulation on all of you out there that are listening and watching this, basically what that means is if you taste iron root and you don't like it, you're just not mature enough. It's kind of what he's saying. I kid a little bit, but I have actually observed that. I thought it was interesting because there were, I don't know if I should mention any names, but there was at least one individual that came that, I mean, he is probably the most advanced collector that I've ever met of modern whiskeys anyway. He's got one bottle of whiskey that there were only like 10 made, and it's got like a solid gold component to it and all this stuff. Like, and he loved it. He loved the whiskey that we tried. He had a great time. And I remember thinking, like, who am I that 2 weeks ago I snubbed my nose at this stuff, and this guy who's like so much further advanced than I am in his whiskey journey is being open-minded to this stuff, right? And so basically, don't be that guy. So is there anything else that you feel like the public needs to know before we wrap it up?
For me, it's when you're approaching, especially when you're approaching Texas whiskey or craft whiskey in general. I definitely think open-mindedness about, are the flavors good? I think that's the very best way to start out with it. Is this something that I'm enjoying or can enjoy to drink? When you come at it with no preconceived notions of what something's supposed to taste like, because for me, whiskey is supposed to be something enjoyable. It's supposed to be something you can share with friends, and I think keeping whiskey fun is, to me, the most important thing. And I think a lot of times we can get down or get curmudgeony about whiskey. So and so doesn't taste as good as it used to, or those things. And I think when you come at something and you're, am I enjoying this? Can I enjoy this with friends? And again, if you taste something you enjoy, go out and visit that producer, especially if they're nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Learn more about them, because I think that that's, for me, is the most fun part, is going and visiting some of these different distilleries and learning the personalities behind who makes it. Because sometimes you can see that almost that personality coming through in what they make. I think that's one of the coolest things. They have that house style or that house flavor, and you can see it in almost in the personality of the people who are making it. I think
Right.
that's a really great thing.
I would say that your whiskey tastes like y'all's personality.
Yeah.
So
Super gingery.
so much ginger.
Yeah.
So the one last, for those of you who aren't watching, the Licorice Brothers have reddish hair. So the one last thing that I would mention is the reasoning behind the name of your distillery. Tell the good people why you were called Iron Root.
So Iron Root comes from the history of Denison, which is kind of a really fun connection for us in a number of different ways. But back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a gentleman living in Denison called T.V. Munson, or that was his name.
Mhm.
And he was a viticulturist. So he was trying to figure out how to grow European grapes here in the United States, because the Native American grapes don't taste super great, especially when they're turned into wine. And so, but the European grapes, every time they'd plant them, they'd last a couple of years, and then different diseases would get them and kill them off. And so he found this native Texas grape that was super hardy, really resistant, and he started grafting the European, specifically French grapes, on top of this Texas grape root. You just graft them together, and lo and behold, they were surviving and thriving here in Texas. And so it was specifically was designed to fight this thing that we call phylloxera. It's a little kind of mite. And around that same time, that phylloxera bug got transferred from the U.S. over to Europe and kind of went to town in Europe. It wiped out 80% of the French grapes. It was in Italy and Germany, and was just causing all sorts of havoc. And so they actually were able to come to T.B. Munson to start getting some of this Texas root stock, and they were able to save a lot of their vineyards, specifically in Cognac. So for that reason, Cognac and Denison are sister cities. And from us, like again, my brother and I were trained by Hubert Germain Robon and Nancy Fraley, and we come from this really French tradition of distilling, which is how we approach our barrel aging. It's how we
Mhm.
kind of run our stills. Um, and so for us, when we were looking for a place to put a distillery, it made sense for us to come here. And so it's those iron grape roots from Texas that saved the French wine industry. And so that's the name's an homage to that. And we do make grape brandy, in case anyone's wondering. It's a little bit more delicate of a spirit, so it'll take a few more years to get it out. But it's sitting about 4.5 years old right now, and we're getting pretty
Nice.
excited about. Who knows when we'll release it officially, but we'll see.
Awesome. And so I used to collect wine. So from my research, Munson didn't just save the French wine world. My research tells me that the entire world grows its grapes on Texas rootstock, with the exception of Chile, because the how do you say it?
Phylloxera.
Phylloxera dies when you take it over the mountain range into Chile, and it dies in the boat voyage on the way there. And so it's never been able to make its way into Chile. So they've never had to use grafting. But my understanding is that the rest of the world uses variations, genetically modified variations of the Texas rootstock that was discovered by Munson. So Texas basically, so for all of you women out there that have your glass of wine every night after you put your kids to sleep, you can thank Munson for that opportunity. And you should always think of Iron Root Distillery whenever you're drinking your wine.
That's right.
All right. So if people want to get more information about your distillery or your products, where do they go?
They can go to ironrootrepublic.com or check us out on Facebook. That's where we post all the different stuff, especially when we're doing new releases or, doing crazy stuff around the distillery. That's where you'll find it. Pictures of Marsha rolling around doing fun stuff around the distillery.
So for those of you who don't know, there is the what's her name? The mother of
Texas whiskey.
Mother of Texas whiskey. She looks like the first lady of Texas whiskey, and that's your mother, right?
Yeah, we like to joke that she mothers everyone that makes Texas whiskey. It doesn't matter if you're from Iron Root or from any of the other distilleries around the state. She will mother
It must
everyone.
be true, because I was talking to another Texas whiskey producer, and I brought up her name, and like he just got like stars in his eyes, and I was like, "Oh man, I know her too." That's awesome. So yeah, check out their Facebook page, their website. They do a lot of really awesome events here at the distillery, and then if you would like to get more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can go to our Facebook page, which is Facebook.com/Bourbon Real Talk. You can go to our Instagram page, which is Instagram.com/Bourbon Real Talk. We would love it if you would subscribe to our channel on iTunes. And it would be really freaking awesome if you gave us a positive review on iTunes, because iTunes uses those reviews to decide how far up our page is going to come whenever people run searches. And that would help us to be found as well. And so if you have any questions, reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook, and we'll be coming at you live soon with some more great episodes. Y'all have a good day.